Welcome back, everybody. This is the Law and Crime Network, and we have breaking news in the Harvey Weinstein trial. Here is the verdict being reported by my colleague Jesse Weber inside New York Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan. It is not guilty on count 1, guilty on count 2, not guilty on counts 3 and 4, and guilty on count 5. So 2 convictions for prosecutors against movie producer Harvey Weinstein. He's been disgraced in the court of public opinion. He has now been convicted by a jury in Manhattan. This comes after that cryptic message sent last week as to whether or not the jury could be hung on the 2 top counts. This is not a conviction on the 2 top counts of predatory sexual assault. It is a conviction on 2 of the lesser counts. We have 2 people watching along with us right now. Terry Austin is here in studio with me. Terry, much of a surprise here on this or not, in your opinion? How are you reacting to this?
I'm actually not that surprised, Aaron. The fact that they had the questions about the predatory sexual assault, I think it means they were focusing on the lesser crimes and they weren't going to come back with a verdict on the higher crimes, which, as you know, could have meant life for Weinstein.
Exactly. Let's take a look at this visually here so that you can follow along with us right now. Not guilty again on predatory sexual assault. That's 1 and 3. So the bottom line here is that the jury unanimously did not believe the testimony of Annabella Sciorra. Now, this is an interesting one because she, in many opinions, was the strongest of the witnesses for the state. It was a guilty charge on a criminal sexual act. That's for Mimi Halle, and guilty as to Jessica Mann. The jury was stuck, though, on Annabella Sciorra, Terry, because they asked for readbacks. They seem to be probing into whether or not this was an accusation that was just too old, whether it was an accusation which could have been fueled by some drug use, because they asked for readbacks about that parts of her testimony.
Right. I mean, I think they see Harvey Weinstein as a person who can't be trusted, a person who goes too far, a person who uses his power. But I think it means that they don't believe he actually raped individuals, that he used physical force, that he raped Anna Sciorra, or even as far as the others are concerned.
Let's look at the possible penalties here. This is a determinate sentence on count 2 in New York, so we've got a 5 to 25-year range. That's my understanding of the statute on that second count. That's a conviction on that count. So the maximum here could be 25 years for Harvey Weinstein. That is not a light sentence, Terry. The last count here, where there's a conviction, that carries up to 4 years. That's a Class E felony. It's a felony, but it's a very low-level felony here.
Exactly. You know, he's, I think, 66 years old. It matters that, you know, whether or not it's life or whether it's 5 to 15 or whatever the case may be, he will be old when he gets out of prison.
So if you're the sentencing judge here, do you sentence on the high end or on the low end here? Because when a jury sends a split verdict like this, the jury didn't go again for those top charges.
My view is that the judge will probably go for the high end because he has escaped, as you said, Aaron, the top charges in the case.
Let's bring in Cheryl Dorsey. She's a retired LAPD sergeant watching along with us from the West Coast here. Cheryl, your reaction to this verdict coming in, it is a split verdict.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, and so I'm glad that, you know, they believed some of it. And so now we know that, you know, where there's smoke, it may not be a raging forest fire, but, you know, there was a little bit of a burn. And, you know, at the end of the day, he's a convicted felon, and he may even have to register as a sex offender. I don't know. I don't think he's going to get a whole lot of time based on who he is and his infirmities. And so, you know, all of that, first-time offender, we'll have to see.
And we also have the charges out there on the West Coast where you are, Cheryl. It's a big question as to exactly how LA prosecutors are going to move forward with this. Are they going to come and arrest Harvey Weinstein and bring him off to be arraigned on those new charges? He hasn't even answered to those charges yet.
I'm not really sure what the policy and protocol is. There's no urgency. They know where he is. He's not going anywhere. They'll get to him when they get to him. It'll be interesting to see if when this LA trial takes off, if they will be able then to add to based on he's been found guilty here. Will that sway this jury going forward?
Many questions yet to be answered in the legal wranglings here related to Harvey Weinstein. Again, if you're just joining us, this is a partial conviction for prosecutors in New York. It is guilty on count 2, and it is guilty on count 5. So we have a split verdict. It's very important to note, though, Terry Austin, that this could never have been guilty as charged, because the way these charges work is that count 2 is sort of a subset of what's accused in count 1, and counts 4 and 5 are a subset of count 3. So it was either going to be guilty on 1 and 3, or it was going to be some other combination here. There would have never been any such thing if the jury followed the instructions as guilty across the board as charged. We were never going to see guilty, 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 guilty here.
Well, that's right, because you remember the verdict sheet basically said that the predatory sexual assault, if you find him guilty on that, skip to the next predatory sexual assault, because the sub-counts were actually parts of the predatory sexual assault. So you're right. It couldn't be guilty on all counts.
We got that weird question from the jury last week. The verbatim of it here: we, the jury, request to understand if we can be hung on counts 1 and or 3, but unanimous on the others. And this set off a flurry of speculation. I was trying to analyze it over the weekend and try to figure out, okay, what are they getting at here? Because if you're hung on 1 and 3, well, then by default, what are you stuck on? Are you stuck on Annabella Sciorra? Are you stuck on the others? Because 1 and 3 are the counts you have to figure out first. And I had a lot of issues with the way the verdict sheet was written here.
I did too, and I was actually here when that question came in, and we were trying to figure out what exactly does that mean. And clearly what it apparently meant is that they didn't believe Annabella Sciorra, and that they actually thought that the lesser counts against, particularly as it relates to Jessica Mann, but also Miriam Haley, were believable, but not the predatory sexual assault.
You know, it's so interesting though, when you look at the testimony of Jessica Mann, some people thought, who were listening out there, that she was the weakest of the 3 witnesses. What we have here is a conviction on count 5. It's 3rd-degree rape. There's not a conviction. It was an acquittal on 1st-degree rape. And that was a little bit unforeseen here. I think a lot of people were thinking, well, there may be a conviction on 2 and then not guilty on 3, 4, and 5 across the board. That's a really interesting one. I don't know if anybody predicted that.
I think what they were saying is that she wasn't forced, and that's why we got the conviction on the 3rd-degree rape, which was more or less coercion, and they believed her as it related to that. And I think, you know, as far as Miriam Haley was concerned, we talked about this earlier, her testimony wasn't that he full out raped me. Her testimony was, look, this is what happened. He forced the oral sex, etc. And I think the jury truly believed her as a victim.
Cheryl Dorsey listening along with us right now. I think that Terry hit the nail on the head here, Cheryl, because the difference between count 4 and count 5 is that element under New York law of forcible compulsion. The jury did not find forcible compulsion as to the second primary accuser here, as to Jessica Mann. What they found was that basically there was an unwanted sex act with someone who was incapable of consent for some reason other than age. I'd really be curious to hear from the jury exactly how they got there with this case, because the testimony of Jessica Mann was basically that she was cornered in a bathroom, and we're thinking that that must have been how prosecutors got there with the incapability of consent, that if you're cornered in a room, you can't be capable of consent in any way.
Right. And then, you know, there's that whole question of, you know, those who remained what appeared to be amicable and, you know, continued to be in his presence. You know, it's very difficult for some to fathom, to wrap their head around. If someone violated you in such a vile way, how is it that you could even come within arm's distance of them ever again in your life?
And we heard experts being called by the state to try to answer that question, Terry Austin. And look here, I mean, apparently the jury believed some of that.
Yeah, I think the jury did believe Barbara Ziv was the expert that was called to say, listen, people are raped and they continue on with the individuals that rape them because they're in the context of employment, etc. They may be afraid, they may think that they're going to be accused. So it doesn't mean that the event didn't happen. It simply means that they may not be of the state of mind where they can talk about it or tell other people about it.
And of course, reaction will be pouring in from many people, including outside that courthouse. Who here is going to declare the ultimate victory? Is the state going to declare the ultimate victory and say, well, we got this guy? Or is the defense going to declare victory and say the state didn't get the top charge that the state wanted here?
I think both sides are going to declare victory here. And really, we have to look and see what society and the public says. I think, frankly, based on the split verdict, that there is victory on both sides. I think what the message the jury is sending is, look, you cannot go around and act like this. You cannot go around and expect people to do your bidding just because you have power. On the other hand, the jury is also saying, you put yourself in a position, this wasn't forcible rape, and that maybe, you know, they had some empathy for Weinstein. So I do think that the messages go both ways, and I do think that both sides maybe could claim some victory here.
The jury was on the clock for about 2 hours, and I think last week, I have to go back and double check all my math on this, but the jury was on the clock for about 24 hours by my math last week. They gave this a lot of consideration. We do need to take a break very quickly here on the Law and Crime Network, but of course, we are following the situation outside New York Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan. We have cameras stationed around that courthouse waiting for reaction to come in from both the defense and from the prosecution. So stick with us here on the Law and Crime Network. We have had this case covered from the beginning live for you, and we will continue that right after this.